we're going to rock you hard, because these guys have been there. The core of this group played with Mitch Ryder as the Detroit Wheels, and some of them has also played with such notables as Jimi Hendrix and Bob Seger, but now they're the Rockets with Oh Well.
Hey everybody. Well, I reviewed this Guitar Player magazine, July 1980. What a great issue. Great time in music. Kind of the time when MTV and New Wave were coming out. I remember that. Things were changing a little bit, but still a lot of great music in 1980. And I almost missed it. But this particular ad in the back, I've turned the page, it almost passed me by, but that is Jim McCarty of the Detroit band The Rockets, one of the great rock and roll bands ever to come out of Detroit, and never quite made it onto the national scene. But I have a video about the Rockets. I was from Detroit, and I saw them at Pine Knob years ago, right around the time, right before they broke up. Wish I would have seen them a year or two earlier, but they were still great. And that is their guitar player, Jim McCarty. And here he is, endorsing Legend Musical Instruments, Legend Amps. The best damn guitar amplifier we ever heard. And that's Dennis Roberts, by the way. He was kind of a ringer they brought into the Rockets. I think on some of at the high point of their success, they added a guitar player. And he was a really good guitar player like Jim McCarty is. And they really sounded good with him. And then he ended up playing in Nashville, this Dennis Roberts. And I think he passed away, but he ended up going into country. You know, if you're a really good guitar player, in the 80s or 90s when rock and roll like that kind of faded from style, you could maybe go into country, and he was in country. But that's Jim McCarty. Now, Jim McCarty was in the Detroit, Mitch Ryder and the Detroit Wheels. I knew Dave Gilbert because he was from my hometown. He was older than I was, but actually, I knew him. I'm not going to try to sit here and say he was one of my best friends by any stretch, but I definitely knew who he was and saw him around, and, was in his house a bunch of times, actually, too. So, but that's the Rockets. And the other interesting thing about Jim McCarty, let's see here. He was in another band. Some of you hardcore vinyl files, vinyl aficionados might remember this band, Cactus, with Carmine Apiece and from Vanilla Fudge, and Tim Bogart and Carmine Apiece from Vanilla Fudge, and so that has some Jeff Beck associations too, and that's Jim McCarty, and so that's an old, right after Mitch Ryder and the Detroit Wheels, he played in this band Cactus, and I've heard this album. It's actually a really good album. Never really cut, I would say, but you have Carmine Apiece. Now, Carmine Apiece, of course, ended up playing for Rod Stewart for years, and Tim Bogart, too, and they were both from Vanilla Fudge. But that's, boy, what a time capsule. But that ad there, is Jim McCarty. And he still plays. He plays, I'm Facebook friends with Jim McCarty, and he still plays. He plays a lot around the Detroit area and also up around Traverse City, Michigan. And you know what? He still plays the Les Paul. I wonder if it's that same Les Paul he's had, because he still has a black Les Paul that you're always seeing him with. So, and that's the one he's had back in those days too. But they're the Rockets. And just to show you, there's another vinyl. That's the Rockets. Boy, that's old Detroit right there. Look at that old rock and roll band. Kind of a blue collar looking crew. Sort of appropriate for the city. And that guy right there, he was the guy from my hometown, and I actually knew him pretty well. He's unfortunately no longer with us, and he died a while ago, and he wasn't that old. You think he died at the age of 49, so we don't need to go into all that, but kind of a colorful character in his way, but really great. Jim McCarty. You can Google Jim McCarty. There he is. Yeah. There's Dave Gilbert. And he was a guy from my hometown. I knew him. And the guy I used to be in a band with used to take singing lessons from Dave Gilbert. Believe it or not, we'd go over to his house and take singing lessons. Lucille, Love Me. What a great album. Long, Long Gone by Bob Seger. That's oh man, Lost Forever, Less for Dreaming. Oh Well. Oh Well is a Fleetwood Mac. Don't Ask Me What I Think of You. And there's Turn Up the Radio and Can't Sleep. Those were two songs. And boy, you heard those a lot on Detroit radio. And you left the Detroit market, even went to like probably Grand Rapids or Battle Creek or Gary, Indiana or something, you wouldn't hear it, let alone, other parts of the country or world. So they never really got out of the Detroit market. But in Detroit itself, they were huge. I mean, big 2-3 night appearances at Pine Knob and tons of the tickets would sell out instantly, but they never quite made it to the national market. Bob Seger was like that for a long time too. I don't know if you can see that today, but Bob Seger was like that. Only he did finally break through. But when I was like 14 or 15, Bob Seger was huge in Detroit, kind of like the Rockets, and no one had ever heard of him outside of Detroit. Like you went to Chicago and they'd be like, Bob who? Now when Night Moves came out, that changed for Bob Seger. He became a national figure. The Rockets never quite did. There's Jim McCarty. And I also think it has to do with the fact that they were just a little later. Bob Seger, Ted Nugent, Brownsville Station. Those were all great Detroit bands. I'm probably missing, Bob Seger, Brownsville Station, Ted Nugent, Mitch Ryder. But they were a little earlier, and the Rockets were still playing that good old party, barroom rock and roll, good time Charlie rock and roll at a time when disco and new wave was kind of merging, and the times were changing. And I think if they'd have hit the markets maybe 3 or 4 years earlier, just a few years earlier, it might have made a difference for them. But boy, they sure were good. And that's Jim McCarty, and I just think that's cool because there we have let's see here. I got all this stuff out here. Where's that? There it is. Guitar Player Magazine. Jim McCarty and Dennis Roberts. Yeah, I remember them warming up for The Who, Kiss. Seems like it was Kiss, but I remember for sure they warmed up for The Who. And that Dave Gilbert, he'd be gone for months, and I knew the guy that stayed in his house was kind of a house sitter, and would go over there. And I met Dave Gilbert quite a few times actually, but I also was in his house a bunch when he wasn't home because he was on the road, and his house was kind of a non-stop, if you catch my drift. Look at that. Is that an old that's an old guitar tuner from yesteryear. Look, they don't have headstock tuners. Look, isn't that what it is? That's an old strobe tuner. Small world. Well, I just wanted to share that. If you like great guitar players you may or may not have heard of, but one that definitely deserves to be remembered is Jim McCarty. Mitch Ryder and the Detroit Wheels, that would be like he played on Jenny, 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 won't you come along with me, Jenny, Jenny, woo. He played on C Ryder, all those great Mitch Ryder songs. And then after that band, he was in Cactus, but then he with the drummer from the Detroit Wheels, which was that Johnny B. That's Johnny B right there. Started the Rockets, and they were around for most of the 70s and some of the early 80s. Never quite made it. It's kind of a sad story. I wouldn't say they were their ultimate end. I would say it was kind of frustrating in some ways, maybe their history. But you know what? There's some hits. I mean, you could say some things about their trajectory as a band didn't go that well. But you know what? They did leave us some great kick-ass rock and roll albums. So I definitely recommend checking out these rock. You can nowadays on YouTube, but check them out. And I recommend you listen to any of those. Long, Long Gone by Bob Seger. Great song that Bob Seger wrote for the band. That's what I always heard anyway. That was kind of our Detroit legend. Bob Seger wrote that song and gave it to them. show he supported them. He thought they were a good band. And that's a great song, Long, Long Gone by Bob Seger. Lost Forever, Left for Dreaming. Oh, well. Turn up the radio, can't sleep. Anyway, Jim McCarty, there he is. And that was kind of cool to run across that ad in Guitar Player magazine. Who knew? Great guitar player to be remembered, and he's still alive. If you live in Michigan, check out his website, and he's still around playing. All right, bye.